Okay. So you know how in COVID-19 we couldn't really leave the house and we all kind of jumped on the clock app? Well, that's when I first heard of Mexican Gothic. Due to my cultural background and just being jaded too many times before with other stories that show non-white people as the main characters, I was really wary on how Mexican Gothic was gonna, show show my culture in the story and the narrative. So I was a little bit wary on picking it up, and I did not pick it up until this year. When, funny enough, I decided on my birthday that I was like, I'm gonna read this book. And also, funny enough, this book came out in June 30th in 2020. So we share birthdays. So it was like meant to be. It just took me a second to come around and finally read the book. I once I decided to read the book, I actually requested it from my public university library, and I got a very scary email from them after I didn't submit it on or turn it in on August 21st. It is now September. We're still in the single digit, but about to be double digit. And um, saying that if I didn't turn in the book, that I would lose my library privileges. So you can guess how many days past due I had it. But don't worry, I resubmitted it and everything. And unfortunately, I don't have it for the video, but at least I have the information here in my brain. Anyways, spoilers ahead and beware of the colonizers. Okay, so let me read you the synopsis. So, Mexican Gothic is a Gothic fiction novel set into the Mexico El DF or Mexico City in the 1950s. So, our main protagonist, Noemi Tawada, is a socialite in her 20s that is trying to carve her own way of life against her family's expectations of marriage and against her family's wishes. She wants to pursue a master's in anthropology. After her father, Leocadio Taboada, receives an alarming letter from his newlywed niece, Catalina Taboada Doyle, with suspicion of ill intent against her person, she gets a responsibility to uncover the truth. If Naomi goes and assesses the situation with her cousin at the high place in the mountains of El Triunfo, she will be allowed to continue her studies in her higher education, and when she arrives, Naomi is surrounded by gloom, despair, and a terrible secret that eventually rears its ugly head as she tries to escape. So, I have always been worried on how my community is going to be portrayed in stories. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm really jaded and I'm I'm easy to disappoint, I guess you could say. But I was really pleasantly surprised when I read this story. I haven't I don't remember when it was the last time that I read a book that it had a Mexican female lead that was like this character. She's strong, she makes her own decisions, she carves her own path, and with her strength, she was able to get her cousin and the only good Doyle of that place to safety and gotten them out of there. But anyways, spoilers ahead. When I started reading this book, I also didn't realize, at least I think it is, it's a love letter to not just the horror genre itself, but specifically to the Mexican horror genre. While I was doing research for this video, I went into a rabbit hole on a lot of Mexican horror, including that their last name, Naomi's last name, she shares it with Mexico's famous horror screenwriter and director Carlos Enrique Taboada, with titles as Hasta el viento tiene miedo and Más negro que la noche, or in English, Even the wind is scared and darker than the night. So I'll go a little bit later more about that, but at least I think it's a love letter to that kind of genre. So to me, what I found truly frightening was the loss of agency that came from entering the higher place and the consequences of colonialism, eugenics, and misogynistic patriarchy. So the Doyle family is a personified example of how colonialism doesn't die but takes a new form and continues to survive and thrive. So the Doyle family is from Great Britain, the OG colonizers that got their wealth from silver mines and the exploitation of the local residents. So they even went to the extent of bringing soil from their country so they wouldn't lose their purity to the savageness that comes with being in Mexico with the lowly people. So once Demi gets there from the get go, the Doyle family patriarch is really nasty towards her and starts spouting eugenics nonsense, and at the same time making her personhood uncomfortable. And her cousin's husband Virgil does the same thing to her. She's objectified since the first interaction with them both, and like in other oppressive systems, women are integral part of maintaining misogynistic patriarchal systems that can be seen with um Virgil's aunt, Florence, the only female Doyle that's alive in the narrative. You will This reoccurs multiple times, and the twist of the end of what the like entity is kind of like has a woman at its heart, or it is the woman, she's the heart of it all, and how women's bodies are used either against other women and against other people under these oppressive systems. So, I was ready to throw metaphorical hands for my girl Noemi. I was like, you gotta get out, you gotta get out. She didn't get out until the end, but But yes, so the mushroom lore. So in this story, mushrooms are used as kind of backtrack. So the things that Naomi starts to experience are all connected with mushrooms. Are part of like an ancient thing where the patriarch Doyle kind of got his hands on them to live like an immortal life, and he sacrificed one of his wives to become like the heart of it all, so will stay alive and practically uses his family as his way to never die. Every time there is a young man about 24, they said in the book, he transfers bodies when he's an old hag to stay young forever. And this is all done through like incest, through so he marries either marries quote unquote his daughters and has children with them to continue the cycle so he can stay practically young forever. And these mushrooms can be seen throughout the story. At first, Naomi's like confused on what she's feeling and what she's seeing, but eventually she starts to hallucinate. She starts to see things, and um, I don't think I can see mushrooms the same ever again. At first, I thought they were cute, but now it was used literally to control her, and I'm so glad she got away from that. But between or in the chaos of all this negativity with the patriarch Doyle, and then for her cousin's husband that's just a nasty creep and almost not almost making advances at Naomi, is the only light amongst the darkness, and his name is Francis, and he is the younger cousin of Virgil. It's Virgil's younger cousin, and he's very sweet and nice to her, trying to help her out as she can, telling her to get away from this place, that she needs to leave. And of course, she can't leave because, the promise she has with her dad and her cousins there. But uh and then as their relationship progressed and they became closer, and even though he was weak and really couldn't go against his family, he did his best to try to protect her, trying to be it's just it gave me a lot of like Rory Williams from Doctor Who vibes, and I really enjoyed his character. I guess I'm just a sucker for that, for the cat and the dog dynamic. It's great, it's sweet. He is we don't get a lot, so in true fashion of like old novels, um we don't see a lot of the romance. It's mainly more of the suspense, the thrill, the story in it all, the lore of the mushrooms. But we only see like a smidge of the romance in there. But the little that I get, I really ate it up. Kind of like in Pride and Prejudice at the end, it wasn't. They didn't show a lot of the romance, but what I did get, I love. But Francis was definitely a good addition to the story and made it more whole. And it also makes sense that not everybody in that family agrees with those systems and is, I wouldn't say willing, but it's trying to go against what was set for him. And at the same time, he doesn't believe he can get like true freedom or anything or get out of that family structure. And I really like the way the author makes Naomi help Francis out of that situation and kind of lead him into a new life. And then next, I like to talk about Catalina, the cousin. So Catalina was playing a long game. So when we first heard of Catalina, she was in a really frantic state of saying that they wanted to kill her, and we get to know that they really did, and that she's being poisoned. She was with the mushrooms, and then she started playing this like almost doll, not almost a doll cell, like like a shattered doll that she can do anything. But at the end, when it came to fast forward to the story, everything has gone down, and Naomi and Katarina are trying to escape with Francis's help. They get caught, and when they get caught, Catalina gets a knife and stabs the patriarch in his face. He just starts going and going. And honestly, girl, I went she did that. I was like, oh, Catalina. I was not expecting her to do like a 180 and to see that it was all an act, that she was just like a ragged, broken doll. Shout out to the author. When I read that, I was like, yes. And then, fast forward, when they're trying to escape, and then Virgil catches up to them, and she also does the same thing to him. I was like, kill him. Dead. Done. Done. Anyways, shout out to Catalina. She was a underrated character that I really truly came to love at the end. So it surprised me. So two more things I like to talk about the book. So the first one is being the one thing that stuck out to me was the horror of the violation of like her personhood and her bodily autonomy, because these mushrooms, these magical mushrooms, kind of make the people that are surrounded by them lose their inhibitions and be swayed by whoever has control of the mushrooms. Naomi, it really scared me in some parts. I wasn't expecting almost like SA in these books, but I was truly scared for her. There was these moments in these different chapters where, for example, there's a chapter where she, after like a really bad situation, she wanted to take a shower, kind of, you know, cleanse herself of that, and she starts to have these hallucinations that she is about to be intimate with Virgil, but she is swayed by these mushrooms. And then in future chapters, it's alluded that it could have actually happened and not just like in her mind. And that really just stuck with me, like the loss of her bodily autonomy, the loss of being to be able to consent to any of this. And I think, like I was mentioning earlier, these are the parts of the book that truly frightened me more than the mushrooms ever could have. The mushrooms are they're a great addition to the story and the fabric of it all. But when it came to these things, these real things that happen in the real life world, I this is when truly I was truly scared for her, and not so much the supernatural elements themselves. And the last thing I wanted to say was the way this book ends. It doesn't end in a pretty bow. So fast forward, Katerina kills Virgil, and they're able to escape um, out of the higher place and or the high place, and they're rescued and taken to the local inhabitants, um, the local doctor's house, and they're able to practically patch up and get in contact with Naomi's father to go get them. What's it called? Francis makes it, Naomi makes it, Catalina makes it, and the house starts burning down because the way they escape is that Naomi sets fire to the heart of all of the mushrooms to let them all be free, including the person that was imprisoned to be the heart. And at the end, Francis, because he's like a mushroom geek, starts saying that sometimes some spores don't die with because of the fire; they just get spread, and that's practically how it ends. That he's scared of the higher place not actually being destroyed, and that his aunt or his family, the Doyles, are still alive, and it gets to do harm in the future. Then Naomi practically says if that happens, they're just gonna burn them down more. But it it is left open ended. And I really think this is interesting. It could even be a sequel, but I think this is a full completed story that doesn't really need that. I like this as a lone standing novel. And my applauses to the author. This was a great read. I recommend it. I'm not sad. I'm a little sad that it took me so long to read this, but I'm glad that I read it when I read it now, especially now that I'm older. I'm in my mid 20s. My brain has, finally finalized, cooking up there, and I can now analyze things differently. And I also have her next book, or I have another book of hers checked out. I believe it's called Gods of Jade and Shadow. So I'm currently reading that, and then I have like I'm looking at my nightstand right now. I have like 10 books that I've checked out from the library to read. But yeah, but that's about Mexican Gothic. I enjoyed it, and if you're looking into that kind of stuff, you should definitely read it. Also, I'm gonna do a little deep dive into the history of Mexican horror. So, I've always known that Mexican horror was part of the Mexican psyche. I remember being little, like elementary school, watching the Mexican luchador horror films, including El Santo versus Las Mujeres Vampiro, or El Santo versus the Vampire Women. El Santo was a big icon of lucha libre, or I guess what you consider WWE, but Mexican version, the original version. And he got a lot of these movies. I also remember watching Santo y Blue Demon versus Dracula y el Hombre Lobo, or Santo y Blue Demon versus Dracula and the werewolf. So these were a lot of luchadores at the time that would get movies, and it's kind of like a subset of the horror genre in Mexico. And when I tell you these movies are camp, they are camp. I love camp, so I really enjoyed them. And I even found a 1966 luchador version of the Phantom of the Opera. Like, when I found this out, I texted my friend that I went to go see Phantom of the Opera with before they closed out in Broadway, and I was letting them know that we have to watch this. So it's called La Sombra del Murciélago, or The Shadow of the Bat, and you can actually find it on YouTube. Anyways, it's camp. All of these films are camp, and I loved every minute of it. And I'm glad that this book, even though it was not fully connected to the camp of it all, I do think, I think at least, it's a little bit of a love letter to the Mexican horror genre. Anyways, thank you for watching this video and watching me talk about this for all these minutes. And like I said, I will never look at mushrooms the same ever again. And bye.